Hey there. So, while it's been fun healing on my priest, it really made me curious on, what it's like to be healing or what it's like to go back to my restoration druid. So, let's find out how these druids actually heal in raids. Now, druids keep everyone up differently compared to disciplined priests. Priests have this preventive nature in healing, while druids are more reactive. Sure, you can drop off your heal over time spells early or just pre-hot, but first things first, damage is eventually taken. Blanketing half your raid with heal over time effects is still amazing though, as it allows you to handle other damage type situations unless you throw in some cast time heals. So let's get into this guide on how you get started as a restoration druid. And as usual, you can click on any of the links you're seeing right now to jump straight into specific parts of this guide. Also, as with the older guides I've done, any glyph suggestions are inserted as I go along. Okay, let's get into your talents. So for tier 1, the level 15 role, all these are pretty good choices and you can pick any. So I basically like it when choices are all pretty good and you're not forced to pick just one. So the first option is swiftness. It grants you passive movement increase, which lets you get out of nasty stuff and get raid members within range faster. Displacer is also a good pick as it ports you forward and gives you a speed boost, and Wild Charge also allows you to basically jump to an ally when not shape-shifted. Now, the latter two picks have relatively low cooldowns, so they're basically good choices, even though swiftness is passive. For the second row, I basically suggest only two choices. That's Izera and Cenarion. Izera is, as I also suggested in my Guardian Druid guide, it's pretty good because it requires no management and the healing output is pretty good. Cenarion is also a good pick as it acts like a hot or a heal over time effect that activates when damage is taken. It's useful for predictable damage or consistent heavy damage. The level 45 row is pretty much a utility tier, so I think all these options are viable picks. So Typhoon is good just for the knockback and the possible interrupt. Swarm is useful to snare mob, and Entanglement is great for rooting multiple enemies. So basically, just pick the talent that is most useful in a given fight. Now, tier 4. Since this is a basic guide, we'll keep this part as simple as possible. So if you want to conserve mana, Force helps you by summoning a Treant to do some of the work for you. You won't be able to control the random healing provided to non-targets though. Now, in my experience, even while struggling with mana when I first started out, I liked Soul as it provides control on which spell I can choose to buff. What it does is that Swiftment grants you the one-time Soul buff to increase the effectiveness of several spells. Now, the last option, Incarnation, is a significant healing boost which you will basically notice in tight situations, but it does have a very lengthy cooldown, so it's best to make sure to make use of it to the fullest while the buff is up. Now, the level 75 row is another utility tier. Vortex and War can come in handy in many situations because they're AoE in nature. Now, the snare and pullback effect of Vortex helps make sure you keep mobs in place, while Roar's AoE Incapacitate will have some situational uses. Bash is useful for that lengthy stun if you're assigned to do that during any fight. So basically, it depends on assignment and whatever's most useful for a given fight. Now, tier 6, again, let's keep it simple for this part. So if you need a strong healing buff, then it's Heart of the Wild, as it buffs your heals by 35%, but it has a very long cooldown. Now, Dream is also a good option if you can find a way to consistently work Wrath into your whatever it is that you normally do. Dream buffs Wrath damage by 20% and heals a friendly raid member for 150% of the damage it does. It can get in the way when you're starting out, but it's good as you also help out the raid twofold. Now, Vigil is a good choice due to the manageable cooldown. What it does is that your single target heals also damage nearby enemies for 30%, and all single target heals and damage spells also heal a nearby target for a smaller amount. Now I can see how basically Dream and Vigil will be preferred choices as you move into higher tiers of rating because of the dual effect they have. Now for the last row or the last tier, well, it's basically just a germination. So it's really just that talent for this tier. Having 2 rejuvenations rolling on a single target is just, or multiple targets, is just really good healing. Okay, so it's time to move on to my suggestions for the stat priority you can follow as a restoration druid. So there's basically just, I basically just follow my older guides and suggest just 4. The first one is intellect, second one is mastery, third is haste, and fourth is, well, crit or multi-strike. So for the first one, intellect, it's the best stat, as the potency of your heals are basically improved. Now, for the second one, Mastery, I place this stat due to the dual effect it has. So the Harmony passive base effect buffs your direct healing spells by 10%. Now, it also buffs your periodic healing or heal over time effects provided you land a direct healing spell. Now, the third suggestion, which is Haste, is also a valuable stat and is argued to be better than Mastery. The effect is that it simply lowers the cast time of your spells. Numbers are showing that Haste and Mastery to be very close to each other, so it will come down to whether you value faster periodic healing and cast time reductions, or saving mana by having Mastery buff your healing spells outright. Now, for the fourth suggestion, which is either crit or multi-strike, you can basically pick whether you prefer crit heals or chances to hit a second time with your heals at a reduced value. As with my other class guides, I normally leave out one stat that I feel like, I have to be cautious about. Now for this one, it's Spirit. Spirit is a very important stat for druids and healers in general, so find it in secondary gear if you feel that you run out of mana so easily. However, it eventually becomes a decision you have to make whether pieces of gear could have their allocation points attributed to other more important stats. You can also consider carrying around channeled mana pots if there are some gaps in a fight, or bring the normal mana pots if you feel that you need to bring back up raid members faster. Now, moving on to your other buffs, these other buffs like enchants, food, and flask buffs follow the same priority. Now gearing, well, of course, follows the same list. What you're seeing on your screen right now are very similar to the Disc Priest guide I made recently with some minor edits. So again, it's just the usual typical food buffs, and again, it's the budget versions as I would normally recommend if you're just starting out. You're seeing right now your enchant suggestions, your food suggestions, the potion suggestions, and etc. Okay, so for this part, let's go through the Restoration Druid abilities that haven't been covered in the town section, and we'll start off with the cooldowns in your arsenal. So the first one, it's Tranquility. So this is basically one of the best healing spells in the game. The healing output is just fantastic in that it can out-heal most damage scenarios, especially when used with class mitigation CDs. Now I've noticed that it ignores line of sight restrictions, which is really good if pillars or other objects appear to be in the way. So keep in mind though that it has a lengthy 8-minute cooldown, so you'll have to consider other healer cooldowns when activating this ability. Now the next cooldown you have in your list is Genesis. So it's best used when you have multiple raid members with your rejuvenation effects. It simply speeds up the remaining periodic healing, and it speeds it up into within a 3-second window. It does cost a lot of mana, so keep that in mind. Next is Nature Swiftness, so it's really useful when cast times just can't cut it. So use it whenever it's available, and of course whenever necessary. Next is Bark, or Iron Bark, so it's normally used on the tank to anticipate heavy damage. You can use it on another raid member if he's taking on a lot of damage, especially if the tank is not in any danger anytime soon. Now, Bark Skin is a useful spell you can use on yourself. So one good benefit is that while active, your cast times will not be delayed. Another cooldown is Stampeding Roar. So basically, there's always a situation where you have to get out of the fire. So Roar can help you and nearby friendlies get out of the bad pretty fast. You also have your standard combat resurrection spell in Rebirth. You also have Swift Mend. It's a mini panic button that can only be used on targets that have existing rejuve or regrowth heal over time effects on them. So take note that critical hits will also apply the Living Seed buff. So keep in mind that this Living Seed buff also applies to your regrowth and healing touch spells. Okay, let's move on to your actual spells. The first one it's a signature spell for Druids. It's Rejuvenation. So this is the first one of your staple spells as basically the class for the class itself. So try to keep Rejuve up on multiple raid members, provided you don't overheal to keep it mana efficient. Now the next spell is Regrowth. So it's one of those spells that I like about Druids. The dual healing component is nice, but just make sure you don't spam it too often. If you don't need the heal over time effect, you can gain additional crit chance on the direct heal component, and that's via the Glyph Suggestion, which is Glyph of Regrowth. Next spell is Life Bloom. So keep this one up normally on your tank or anyone who's consistently taking damage. So remember that this ability has a chance to make your next regrowth cost no mana due to the Omen of Clarity proc. Now, Touch is your basic healing spell, so I would normally recommend prioritizing your HOTS unless you can insert this efficiently in a given situation. Now, Growth is your AoE healing spell, which should be used only when necessary, so time it properly when you expect raid-wide damage. You can also glyph it to increase the numbers affected, but you have to consider the extended cooldown. So that's via the Glyph of Wild Growth. Now, Wild Mushroom is a decent area of effect healing spell that is very useful if you have raid members stacked in one area. So sprouting mushrooms is a very good it's basically a very good glyph, since you can exactly place the spot of the mushroom and not be limited to a raid member's location. Now, Druids also have other spells that are useful. So the first one that comes to mind is Mark of the Wild. So it's a standard before any fight. It's very rare that people forget to buff before fights, but always check for this before rushing in a battle. Another useful spell is Cyclone. So Clone is useful if you're asked to perform or you're on crowd control duty. Keep in mind though that you can't do anything to the target while it's affected by Clone. And lastly, we have Roots, which is another one of your CC effects, but it's breakable by damage. Okay, let's move on now to Resto Druid gameplay. Now, Resto Druids in action is pretty simple, but there's really no straightforward rotation. So it's more of just basically use whichever's best for given scenarios. So excuse me. So when you're concerned with single targets, keep these spells you're seeing right now in mind. So number 1 is Rejuvenation, number 2 is Regrowth, next is Life Bloom, then Healing Touch, and then Swift Mend. Now, Rejuvenation is important and is suggested that you pre-hot your target before incoming damage. Regrowth is important, not just because of the heals, but also because of the mastery effect, which also buffs your periodic heals. So it's best to make sure that you have you keep the harmony effect up every 20 seconds. Now keep in mind that Swift Mend and Healing Touch also count to help keep the harmony effect up. Now when we move on to raid-wide or AoE scenarios, keep the following spells in mind. So that's Wild Mushroom, Wild Growth, Tranquility, and Rejuvenation. So, well, basically Rejuve can also be considered an area of effect spell, since you'll be keeping it up on multiple targets anyway. Now, Mushroom is excellent to have it around, as it's normally basically just fire and forget unless a lot of movement is expected. And in such cases, you just have to predict the optimal location of, well, at least the optimal location for the spell. While growth is, as mentioned in the ability section, has to be timed properly as it costs a lot of mana. Of course, the powerful tranquility spell can be used when everyone is in panic mode. Again, just make sure to time it properly. Okay, macros and add-ons time. For macros, I'll just copy the macro I did for my Disc Priest guide. So this one is using the heal spell of Disc Priest. But anyway, what you do with this macro is just replace that heal spell with whatever Druid spell that you want to use to basically just make things easier for you. Again, you have to do this for every single spell that you want to apply the macro to. So it's convenient as that it allows me more freedom to sort of position my mouse elsewhere and allows hover casting. Now, in case you don't want to do that, I will suggest the same add-ons I suggested in my disc guide, which is Healbot or Click. So these add-ons just basically make it simpler to heal large groups and will not require creating macros for each spell as I suggested. Both are available on curse.com. Now, one more add-on I'd like to suggest is Tell Me When. I've noticed that Druids basically manage a number of buffs and cooldowns. So what the add-on Tell Me When does is that it helps me to basically do that. And it also is useful for other classes and specs. Now the add-on, as with the two other suggestions I made, can also be found in Curse. And that's it for this Druid healing guide. So I'll have to be honest, it's been fun going back to my Restoration Druid instead of just basically bear tanking with it. The difference between disc healing and Resto Druid healing is pretty significant, which is good for variety's sake. Anyway, so please like this video if you liked it, leave a comment, and support me by subscribing. Thanks for watching.